He's Henry Gomez, an advertising agency strategist with over 20 years of experience.
And he's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief. And together we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing discussion about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising in general. So Howard, you sent me via email a cartoon from the Marketoonist, and I wanted you to, we're going to put it up on the screen here for a few seconds so people can see it while we discuss it. I wanted to know what piqued your interest with this cartoon and get your takeaway on it from kind of a briefing standpoint.
Yeah, Henry, Tom Fishburne is the Marketoonist, and I've known him for a couple of years. I've purchased the rights to some of his cartoons for my books, and I've used it in my training. And the one he came up with this week was on creating personas, and it really caught my eye. It's something that I talk about extensively in my training for the ANA. And the cartoon, as you can see, the gentleman at the front of the room is saying our persona is named Cheryl. She's 35 to 44, drives an Acura, and listens to Coldplay. What other useless trivia can we completely make up? And this hit a pretty raw nerve for me in terms of what I hear consistently when I do training. People who are responsible for their brands, who are marketers, and even some creatives in the companies that I do training for, really don't know their customer. They say that they have personas, but when I read an example of a brilliantly written creative brief that has a novelist's like description of a client or of a customer, my first question is, do you know, speaking to the trainees in my workshop, do you know your customer as well as this brief explains their customer? And I kind of get a deer in the headlights look on their face. It's like, well, we have personas, right? But they're not, we don't know them this well. I mean, the brief that you just read to us, and I have some great briefs, some of which have made it into my books. They're written like stories, and they bring to life, they bring flesh and blood to an otherwise bulleted point brief that just has facts. And so when I saw this cartoon, and Tom Fishburne is brilliant at parodying us as marketers and knowing us and the challenges that we face as marketers and advertising professionals and strategists, he nailed it right on the head, because this is a sin we commit all the time.
We're an easy industry to parody, I think. So
that's so true.
It's a rich field for him to sow, definitely with regard to the parody. Listen, I agree with you. I think probably the target description in a creative brief is probably the most underrated of the sections of the creative brief. We have focused a lot of effort on the insight, on the single-minded proposition, but we don't. A lot of brief writers don't spend a lot of time really honing that target description into something that is more than just some dead or useless facts. I was having a conversation with my creative director the other day. I was saying, the target description is there for me to create empathy in you, empathy for the target audience. And it's almost like that target description becomes a costume that you have to zip up and put on, right? You have to put it on and live life a little bit momentarily in the mindset of this person that I'm describing to you, so that you can connect and relate to them, so then you can create work that will be relevant, and for them to look at that work and say, oh, that's so true. It's kind of the same thing with stand-up comedy, right? Like the best stand-up comedy is the one that makes you think like, that's so true, and you can only do that when you have true keen insights into human nature. So target description to me is one of those areas where a lazy brief writer, you really see that they're lazy right away in the target description. It was an exercise in, I have to put something here, so I'm going to copy and paste the description from the research report, or create some useless facts. Like, look, the fact that she listens to Coldplay or drives an Acura or whatever, that might be relevant in a certain circumstance, but without context, that certainly is not relevant. And by the way, what is somebody age 35 to 44? Like, what is that? Like, you know, so I mean, there's different ways to skin a cat, and I don't think that there's one way to write a target description. Some might be to create a single persona, and then you have to stick to that persona. She can't be 35 to 44 years old. Nobody's 35 to.
No.
She might be 39 years old. Let's say that. You know, the client also shouldn't challenge us on that. You know, they're like, well, that's really the target is what. It's like, this is a creative bullseye. This is like playing darts. You aim for the middle, and if you don't hit the exact middle, but you get close, you're still in the money, right? Like,
right.
And so the point is, it's something to shoot at. It's not necessarily the be all end all, or that's the only people we're interested in selling to. If you can sell to that 39-year-old, you can sell to the 36-year-old.
My advice to brief writers when it comes to answering that question, who are we talking to, is to write in first person. Say I. And, you know, I like to say that many parts of the brief could be written in first person. In fact, I go further and I say, consider the creative brief like a letter written from our customer to me, the creative person, who's responsible for coming up with this brilliant communication. This is who I am. This is my problem. This is my background. This is how I think now. If you succeed in doing a brilliant communication, this is how I might think after I've seen it. So start from that perspective of I am 39. I drive this. This is my problem. This is what I think. This is what I want in life. And this is how your product, your service can make my life easier.
I agree with you to a point. So here we might have a little bit of a disagreement. I think that in a target description, that's perfectly valid. I don't think it's the only way to skin a cat. You mentioned the novelist. Some novelists use first person, some do not. And that's not the key one way or another to fully fleshing out a character, right? Getting to know a person. So I agree with it that it can work, but there are sections of the brief where I prefer to keep it in the third person, particularly when we talk about an insight, because sometimes the insight is something we know about them that they don't even know about themselves.
True enough.
And so you have to allow for that. So I think that we have to be careful with that, but certainly in a target description, it's a valid way of doing it. And to me, it's a matter of personal preference for the brief writer, or even the same brief writer might do it that way one occasion because it merits it, or might do it in another differently in another occasion. So, experimentation is also good,
Yeah.
If you try and it works, try it again, and maybe it'll work again.
I think one spot on the brief that really lends itself well to the first person, if you have these questions on your brief, is the spot where it says, what does your customer think right now or feel about the product? And what would we like that customer to feel? And that's a great place to say, well, I think this now, or I believe this, or I like this, or I would like to do this, or I would think this way. That's a great
absolutely.
place.
I call that the shift. And
right.
Not every brief I write has a shift in it, but sometimes I do use it. I find it useful in some situations. And we could have a whole other, episode about the shift and what's a good and realistic shift versus a badly written shift. So I think we maybe stumbled on another fodder for another episode. But this has been great. I think that my final takeaway is really, when you're writing a brief, take the time to get to know the target. And then, as I've said before, brief writing is writing. And you have to practice writing. And just like a novelist, just like any storyteller, you have to practice that. And don't go with the first thing you wrote. Edit yourself. Go back, rewrite it. Is this true? There is room for bringing some facts that don't necessarily seem directly relevant if they add texture and make this person into a more real person. But I think the cartoon demonstrates that in a lot of cases that it just feels like randomly thrown together facts.
Tom is brilliant when it comes to that. That's why I like him so much. He really knows how to skewer us. He knows how to touch a nerve, as I said before. So yeah, I think study your audience. If it helps, write it in first person, because then you're really thinking like the customer and you're not thinking like yourself. We've discussed in past episodes how sometimes we end up doing advertising that we like, but not necessarily what our customer likes. So when you find a place on the brief to write in first person, I would say take it, even if it doesn't end up in your final draft. And then I would reemphasize what you said. It's multiple drafts to get to that final draft. It's a story that you're writing. So give it the due. Give it what novelists go through multiple drafts before they finish their stories. We claim that we don't have time to do this kind of writing, but I always remind my workshop attendees, we never have time to do it. We don't have time to do it right. We always have time to do it over.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think that for me, I don't spend a ton of time in a year writing briefs, but it is the pinnacle of what I do. So when I'm doing it, I have to dedicate up some focus and some time to it. Anyway, it's a great topic, and I think we'll probably come back to the target audience in the future, because it's really rich, and even just this conversation has sparked some ideas in how we might approach target descriptions.
I agree, and let's let our audience know that if you have any questions or comments, reach out to us through our websites, and we'll be happy to address your questions. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Henry.
Thank you, Howard.
Okay, Henry, last time we did our creative review, we took a look at a Christmas spot by Amazon. And after we recorded our thoughts, we were talking and saying, we both had some additional comments that we wanted to add. So we've decided to come back in this episode and continue our conversation. So let's take a second right now and watch the spot again, and then we'll talk about it.
The star of the winter show is...
Good evening. All schools across the country will close by the end of the week until further notice as coronavirus reached out.
Okay, so we're back. Last time I pointed out how much I love the fact that Amazon didn't pummel us with a catalog of all the products that could potentially be purchased for a loved one over Christmas. I wanted to expand on that because when we take a close look at this, what is it, a 2-minute film, and the agency of record was Lucky Generals, we want to call that out. If you take a close look at what that present, that gift was that the young man bought for his girlfriend, it was not something that he would put into a package, wrap it up, and hand it over to him, or her, I should say. It was a spotlight. It was literally something that he could use to, no pun intended, shine a bright light on the woman that he loves. And to me, that speaks volumes. That's a more subtle message. Rather than saying, here's a gift, here's a new scarf, here's a bottle of perfume, this is something that I'm not going to actually give you, but I'm going to use it as a way of expressing love. That's a subtle message. That's a sophisticated message. It's poetic. It's almost Shakespearean. And I don't think it could have been accomplished in a shorter version of this. And I know you had some comments about the versions that you've seen. So that was something I really wanted to talk about, because that is the powerful emotion that that's drawn out of us as we watch this spot. And it really impressed me. I was so moved and so impressed.
Absolutely. I think also the fact that flashlight, the spotlight, it was something that you would buy from Amazon, right? Like, it's the kind of thing you would buy from Amazon. But I agree, it's very poetic. It's reminiscent of the great John Lewis Christmas adverts from the UK. It's at that level, I believe. What I wanted to say about it was, since we talked about it last, I've seen a 30-second version of the spot appear in my YouTube watching habits as pre-roll. And this is a spot that truly has been butchered in the 30-second version. There really is no way to tell this story with the same depth, with the same heartfelt emotion in 30 seconds that they did with a 2-minute film. Now, I know creative directors are generally enamored of longer formats, and I've always been a contrarian, and I think that in a lot of cases you can tell a good story in 30 seconds. In fact, one of my favorite commercials that I participated in working on was one for McDonald's, and that one specifically, the 60 is okay, but the pacing of the 30 tells the story, in my mind, much better, because the story was so simple that it didn't require that much setup. In this case with Amazon, I think the more exposition helps the spot. And if you're going to cut it to a 30, I think that the way they mashed it up together, it didn't do it justice. So I'm going to give them like a D- on the 30 and an A+ on the 2-minute film, only because I think there should have been some pushback in terms of either how they were going to do this 30, or maybe do it in chapters where you see, and then there's a continuation in it. But the solution that they come up with, I have to be critical of it, because there's no way that anybody who hasn't seen the 2-minute film could watch that 30 and come away with any sort of idea of what the story is about.
I think that's the nature of concepting. When, as a former copywriter, when I would think about an idea, I would often think about how does the story unfold? And if you're going to produce a 2-minute film, you're going to have the story unfold in that 2 minutes. And then to artificially contract it is going to have a negative impact on the ability of that narrative to live and to exude itself. So I think you're forcing it to work in a space that it's not designed to work in.
I think that it's a function of the media plan driving creative decisions, which it shouldn't be that way. The creative decisions should drive the media plan.
Well, that's another topic we could talk about, in a future episode. Which comes first, the idea or the tactic? And this 30-second version might very well be an example of tactic came first. So.
Yeah. Or somebody said, hey, we need to buy 30s because that's what's on the media plan, and we sold the client.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Henry, that's a great review, a continuing review of A Great Spots. He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. See you next time.
See you next time.